ho, 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 yay. How are you, my holy sisters and brothers? What a day we've had. We're coming out of Yom Kippur. My son and I were in shul today in our backyard minyan from 7:30 in the morning until 8 o'clock in the evening. We did have a 3-hour break in the middle, but no eating, singing, and elevating and praying all day. But with this great underlying joy, we're very blessed that we have such a great community here in Hancock Park in Los Angeles. So many people participating in the service, singing. Our rabbi, Rav Yekusiel Kalmanson, gave some teachings that were just beyond. I hope that your Yom Kippur was meaningful as well. We're still in those days of awe. We've left the 10 days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. But right now, it's time to build our sukkahs. Sukkot is just a few days away. And this idea, spiritually speaking, is that, on Rosh Hashanah, we said God is king, meaning God is sovereign in our lives. We want to submit to God's will because submitting to God frees us, right? When you submit to a source of eternal values, not just whatever's in fashion in your particular decade or even century, then you tune in to why your soul was sent here in the first place. On Yom Kippur, we face all of the ways in which we've dropped the ball. So many ways in which, we're here on a mission. Our soul came into this world to accomplish something that only I can accomplish, only you can accomplish. But, when we stray, we do all kinds of things that are not good. It's not good for ourselves. It's not good for others. It's not good for the community. It's not good for a relationship with with our Creator. And on Yom Kippur, we face that. We're honest about it. And yeah, I dropped the ball in so many ways, and I'm so sorry. And I want to do better. And when you really face all the things that you've done, what you've done is you separate what's not real from what's real, what your real priorities are from the pull of your, momentary impulses just to get pleasure. And you realize who you really are, and you say, okay, this coming year, I'm going to do better. Not just that you're going to avoid sin, but that you're going to accomplish what you came here to accomplish and not waste time. And when you realize what are those sources that draw you astray and that waste your time and waste your family and your community and your Creator's time, you have the strength to put it aside. But it's fragile. It's fragile. So soon we can forget what we learned when we were in that pure and elevated state of Yom Kippur. And so we want to have a reminder. That's what Rabbi Kalmanson told us today. You want to have a reminder. What is going to remind you when those situations come up where you're going to start wasting time or just pursuing momentary pleasures? What's going to remind you who you are and what you want to accomplish in this world? Set that reminder for yourself so it's there before you always, and you're going to do the right thing. And the sukkah represents this booth that we're going to live in for a week, this fragile hut, which a strong wind could carry away. And we're going to make that our permanent residence for a week and make our homes of temporary residence for that week. Well, that represents that fragile new you. And you need help to stay in that. It's not your new you, it's your authentic you. It's like you're really returning to who you really are. But that's fragile because this world is so much with us late and soon, as Wordsworth said. And to stay in that space of being an authentic soul on an authentic mission, it's difficult, it takes work. And so this is that time of year when we think about what's it going to take? What's it going to take for me to be myself, be my authentic self, do the work that I was meant to do, and a reminder for myself when those tough and tempting situations come up during the year. And since we're still in that fragile state, we know that we have to keep praying for help, organizing our lives, etc. That's what's on my mind as I come out of Yom Kippur. Let's light up the darkness. Who is going to be with us on this fine evening as we leave Yom Kippur behind and re-enter our lives? Paula in Chicago, Kevin says Shana Tova from Israel, Sue Strauss in the house from Chicago, John from Seattle, Kathy from Rancho Cucamonga, Carolyn from Raleigh, Gwendolyn from Nome, Alaska. Welcome, Gwendolyn. Carolyn, I know I can't pronounce that last name, like Jervolstad, something like that, from Haksamia. That sounds Nordic. Are you coming in from Scandinavia? Stephen from Long Island. Bill, hoping y'all had a meaningful Yom Kippur. Bud, no political messages, please. Sharon Gemar Tov and Hag Sukkot Sameach from Lebanon. Carolyn, Cindy Schnabel Berman says Gemar Tov. Bill, the musician, was really wailing on that fiddle. Yes, thank you for reminding me. That was Rabbi Shlomo Katz doing his Nigun Nevo. Ed Berg from Galloway, New Jersey. Kevin from Illinois. And Donna with us from Bahama, North Carolina. Over there on the YouTube side, Gwen Strong from Michigan. Lynn from Texas. And Yohanan says Good Yom Tov from Hudson Falls, New York. All right, let's get busy. What are we doing, right? The Talmud goes on. Rosh Hashanah comes, Yom Kippur comes, a person gets married, somebody takes a trip to the moon. If you're doing Daf Yomi, you still have to do your Daf that day. So, where are we in the Talmud? We are in Tractate Eruvin, the third volume of the Talmud. We are on Daf Mem Tes. That is page 49. We're on chapter 4. We're going to finally complete our discussion of Mishnah number 4 and open our discussion of Mishnah number 5. Recall that Mishnah number 4 is all about a person who's on the road, so he's not in his normal dwelling for Shabbos, and he fell asleep sometime before Shabbos started. He might have intended to establish a dwelling for himself, but he didn't do it, and he was asleep when Shabbos fell. And we've been talking about the implications of that. Did he acquire a residence even though he was asleep? If he acquires a residence in the spot where he's lying as Shabbos falls, then he gets 2,000 cubits in any direction from that place. If he didn't acquire a residence, then he would be stuck in the 4 cubits right where he's sitting when he wakes up. And we saw that the law follows the lenient opinion of Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri, even though it's a whole bunch of people lined up to say that he's wrong. The rabbis as a group, and in particular Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yehuda. And yet the law follows Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri. That's where we were. Once we were talking about the minority opinion about the 4 cubits, so then there was some interesting discussions just about that. What is a person's place? A person's place, in other words, if he's only stuck where he is, does that mean that he's rooted exactly where he is? No. A person's space is considered to be 4 cubits. And once we were saying that a person's space is considered to be 4 cubits, a question was asked, well, what happens if a few people who are stuck in their 4 cubits happen to be right near each other? And so there was this situation. Whoa, let me see if I can. Sorry, I just want to. There we go. Hold this up for you in the largest way possible. Okay, so here's a situation where there are 3 people who are stuck in their 4 cubits. You'll notice that the 4 cubits are expressed as a square, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But the issue here is that there's 3 people, and the 2 outer ones overlap with the 4 cubits of the inner person, the middle person, but they don't overlap with each other. And in that situation, our sages taught that this person could have a meal, right? If they're all just sitting down on the ground and having a meal, so the one in the middle could exchange food with the people on the outsides because their 4 cubits overlap. But the 2 outer ones cannot exchange food with each other because their little areas do not overlap. That was the basic teaching about just the people's immediate personal space, their own 4 cubits. But then an analogy was made by Rabbi Shimon, who says that situation is similar to the situation of 3 courtyards. So here you see 3 courtyards in a row, and each one has 2 houses. That's important, so that each courtyard has multiple homes in it. And the 3 courtyards are lined up like this so that the outer ones, connect with the middle one, but they don't connect with each other except by walking outside on the road. Now, that situation actually gave rise to a lot of arguing back and forth and discussions, and I'm just going to sum that up and tell you how the discussion ended, what the law is in the situation of these three courtyards. Namely, if the outer courtyards, so we've been talking about eruv techumen, an eruv of joining or moving, an eruv of moving the Shabbos boundary, that there's a limit to how far you can walk on Shabbos, but we can move that boundary by moving our dwelling, by moving our Shabbos residence, so that we can walk to a place that we'd like to walk to, that it's just a little outside our boundary, but if we move where our dwelling is, then we'll be able to reach that spot. However, when we move our boundary in this direction, we lose the ability to walk as far as we could before in that direction. Now we're going to go back to the other kind of eruv, which was what we were discussing more for the first few chapters of this tractate, of joining areas into an extended private domain, which permits carrying on Shabbos. So in this situation where there's two courtyards on the outside and one in the middle, and now what they ought to do is that everybody should agree to make one big private domain out of the three courtyards. Everybody involved deposits a little bit of food in a basket that's in a house in the middle courtyard, and everybody can carry around those courtyards. Everything is great. But they didn't do that. Instead, what happened was the outer courtyards each made an eruv with the inner courtyard. The inner courtyard made a separate eruv, made a separate agreement to join the courtyards so that the people could carry between the outer courtyard and the middle courtyard from that direction, and the outer courtyard and the middle courtyard from that direction. They should have just all joined in one eruv, but let's say it got done at different times. It wasn't like they were trying to be mean and exclude other people. It just worked out this way. Two eruvs were made. Okay, so now if they still deposited all the food in one place, okay, so then there's no problem. Even though they didn't intend it this way, everybody can walk throughout the courtyards. But if the way they did it was the residents of the middle courtyard made an eruv with the outer courtyard and deposited their basket of food in that outer courtyard, and they made an eruv with the people in this outer courtyard and deposited the shared food in that outer courtyard. Okay, so now this whole thing doesn't work. According to some opinions, nobody can carry anywhere, because since the middle one joined with that outer one, and there's no way to share in the third courtyard on the other side, if you carried something out from the middle to one of the outer courtyards, you'd be removing it from an enclosure, right? It's like there's two enclosures that overlap. That's the problem, right? So the way they did it, because if they deposited the food on the outsides, it's really two enclosures that overlap. There would be an enclosure here, there, and another enclosure there. And if you carried food from the middle out to either side, you'd actually be removing food from one of the enclosures. And for that reason, the whole thing would fall apart. Not only that, even if they put the food in the middle courtyard, but they didn't put it all in one basket, they made two separate eruvs, it would be the same answer. The whole thing would not work. Okay, and now what's going to help us understand what went wrong in that situation and why, we have this further teaching that Rav Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel, that if someone says, I'm joining an eruv with other people, but the people that I'm joining this eruv with, they can't eat the food that I put in the communal basket, right? I don't want to share. So then we have not made an eruv. And even if everybody had the good intent to put a little bit of food in the communal basket, which is going to join these courtyards together into one big private domain, so we can all carry whatever we need to carry as if it's our own backyard throughout these joined courtyards on Shabbos. We can carry on Shabbos. But if one person says, yeah, but nobody can eat my food, he's going to invalidate that eruv for everybody, right? So either we're making an eruv or we're not making an eruv. If we are making an eruv, then everybody in one of these, we're not talking about neighborhood eruv or like whole community eruv, where basically we appoint people to deposit food for everybody else. That's a different structure. Here we're saying it's a bunch of neighboring courtyards, and for this thing to work, the neighbors really have to come together and come to an understanding that everybody's participating in the joining of courtyards. And if one person says, well, all right, I'll join, but I don't want anybody to eat my food, so then he hasn't joined, and this eruv will not be valid. Rav Yehuda also said, in the name of Shmuel, if one divides the eruv into two parts, and this would be like that situation of the 3 courtyards, and the 2 outer ones made an arrangement, separate arrangements with the middle one, but they didn't all deposit their food in the same place. They deposited in 2 baskets. That's why this arrangement won't work. Right now we're learning the general rule that if we are joining some courtyards and everybody deposits the food in one place, but they split it up into 2 baskets, it's not joined well enough. The sages said, no. It's got to be clear that everybody's joining in the eruv. If somebody's trying to keep their food apart, like they're joining but not really joining, this whole thing doesn't work. The only exception to that is, okay, let's say that everybody's bringing a little bit of food to put in the communal basket of food, and then the basket is full, and there's just not enough room in that basket, so the overflow goes into a second basket. That's fine. That's not splitting it up into 2 separate baskets. That's just handling the overflow situation. But if it was clearly split for some reason, that's what's going to invalidate the eruv. Okay, let's see. Another teaching of Shmuel. If, interesting, like now, let's say that we have several courtyards all participating together, like this 3 courtyards in a row, and everybody's going to deposit food in one of the houses in the middle courtyard. If everybody puts bread into a basket in one of the houses in the middle courtyard, except the person whose house it is, right? If everyone puts food in the basket from these surrounding courtyards, except for the person in whose house that basket is deposited, he didn't put any food in the basket. Maybe he didn't think of it. Maybe he forgot. He's obviously participating in this eruv. He's allowing the basket to sit in his house. But he just neglected to put his own food in the basket. Is the eruv valid? Shmuel says, yes, it is valid. He doesn't need to put food in the basket. So then the Gemara asks the question, well, are you saying he doesn't need to put food in the basket because he surely has some bread sitting around the house, so there's some bread in his house that can join in with the communal food basket to establish the eruv for everyone else? If so, that should not work, because we just learned that if you split up the food in more than one container, it's going to invalidate the whole eruv. So his bread that happens to be sitting around the house but wasn't placed in the communal basket should not work for his participation and could, in fact, invalidate the whole thing. And Shmuel says, no. The reason that he doesn't have to put food in the basket is because what are we doing here by joining the courtyards? What we're really doing is we're allowing everybody who participates in the eruv to acquire rights in the properties that are joining in the eruv. The reason we can all carry throughout those courtyards that have joined in the eruv for the purpose of carrying is that legally, technically speaking, what we're saying is that everyone has a small right of ownership. It's not something you could, take a home mortgage out on. It's not even something you could say I have a legal right to walk through your property. But it is a little bit, right? It's like you have some kind of a right that you're all co-owners just for the purpose of carrying on Shabbos. You have some little property right that you acquire by joining in this eruv. So clearly the person who lives in that house has, he already has acquired a right in that residence where the basket is sitting, and that's enough of a contribution to the communal eruv. He's also hosting the basket, as it were, and that's going to be enough to make the whole eruv valid and to make this person's participation in the eruv valid as well. Now that we're saying that what you're really acquiring by participating in this communal food basket is this, this small legal right to be there, to like a little bit of co-ownership, so that you can all which is what makes it all one big private domain that we can carry in on Shabbos. Well, then couldn't we acquire that right, not just by, depositing some food in that basket, but maybe I could deposit a little bit of money in the basket. Maybe I didn't have some food lying around, so can I just put a few pennies in the basket? And the sages argue about this, and they say, well, what's going to be the minimum amount of money? But then that whole line of thinking gets overridden, and they say, no. We don't want people doing this with money. They cannot do this with money. You can't acquire a right to carry on Shabbos by depositing a little bit of money in that community eruv. You can only do it with food. You can only do it with food. You can also establish a Shabbos dwelling for the purposes of your boundary, right, of where you can walk and where your dwelling is, even for carrying. I guess you can establish a dwelling in a private domain by being there. You can establish it with your feet, or you can establish it with a basket of food, but you cannot establish it with money, nor can you establish your dwelling by just leaving some other object there. Like you can't put a utensil, a knife, a fork, a basket, a container. You have to put some food in the basket, or be the one where they're depositing the basket of food, or you can actually be there at the beginning of Shabbos with your feet. Those are the only possibilities for establishing a dwelling, right? Not exactly. Now we go to our next Mishnah. Now we're going to see there's one other way to establish a Shabbos dwelling that is not with a basket of food and is not with being there with your feet, nor sending somebody to be there for you with their feet and say, I'm establishing a dwelling for so-and-so who asked me to do it, and I'm here establishing his Shabbos dwelling. The fifth Mishnah, and I'm almost done because we're only going to introduce the discussion of the fifth Mishnah, so if you have comments or questions, please put them in. I'm about to get to them. But the fifth Mishnah says, if a person is walking home, and Shabbos is coming, and he realizes he's not going to get home in time, and he's not even going to get within 2,000 cubits of his home, but he knows. So let's say he knows he's made this walk many times. He knows what time it is. He knows where he is, and he realizes that he's exactly, pretty much, or just under 4,000 cubits from home. Right, so 4,000 cubits is the end-to-end limit of a Shabbos boundary, right? You get 2,000 cubits in any direction, so that's like a total of 4,000. So he knows he's within 4,000 cubits of home, and he knows that halfway between where he is now and his home, there is a particular tree. So now what he says with his mind, right? Or he can say it with words, but the point is he's going to establish a Shabbos dwelling by saying something even though he's not there and he hasn't put food there. And he says, I'm hereby establishing my Shabbos dwelling under the tree that is halfway between me and my house. If he says that, he hasn't done anything. This is a failure. Nothing happened. And in fact, as we'll see, he may have really set himself back quite a ways. But if he says, I hereby establish my Shabbos dwelling right next to the trunk of that tree, that particular tree that's halfway between me and my house, then he establishes his dwelling next to the trunk of that tree. And now what has he done? He's established himself that his dwelling is halfway between him and his house. So now, even though Shabbos might fall while he's still on the road, it's okay because he's walking to the trunk of the tree and then past the trunk of the tree. And it's all, and where he started and where he's headed, his home, are all going to be within his Shabbos boundary, within that 4,000 cubits. And his declaration of my Shabbos dwelling, this Shabbos is going to be next to the trunk of that tree, is effective. We'll analyze in one moment why, when he said beneath the tree, it was a failure. But first, there's a little bit more information in the Mishnah itself. which is, yes. So once we're talking about, and so we've said many times, over and over we've said that a person, in terms of their Shabbos boundary, is 2,000 cubits in any direction from his Shabbos dwelling. So that sounds like a circle with a radius of 2,000 cubits. So that would look like this. Let me get that figure. Right. There we go. So that's a circle with a radius of 2,000 cubits. So presumably he can walk 2,000 cubits in any direction on Shabbos. That turns out to be the opinion of Rabbi Hanina ben Antigonus, a 2,000 cubit circle. But the rabbis say that you're in the center and you can walk 2,000 cubits in any direction, but really that's kind of like north and south and east and west. But if you head toward the corners, you can go even further. Why? Because they square the circle. They give you a square with 4,000 cubits, the length of each edge. They actually make your Shabbos boundary bigger than if it was a circle. It's a square with 4,000 cubits along each edge. And that's why earlier, when I showed you those overlapping domains of a person who didn't get a proper Shabbos boundary, he was stuck, he left his domain, he only gets the 4 cubits around him. That also was a square, and it's for this reason. The rabbis declared it's a square. Whether it's 4 cubits or 4,000 cubits, it's going to be a square. Okay, now the Gemara explains the reason that the person who said, I'm walking home, I'm 4,000 cubits away from home, I'm not going to make it if my dwelling is where I am now when Shabbos falls, but I can declare that my Shabbos dwelling is going to be halfway between me and my house because I'm familiar with this road, and I know a particular tree. You can't just say halfway between me and home. He's saying there's a particular tree, and I'm going to establish my domain next to its trunk. That works. Why? Because he named a spot that's that's 4 cubits in diameter, right? If he said just under the tree, then his declaration was too undefined, right? Under the tree, that could be a space, 100 cubits by 100 cubits if it's a really big tree with branches sticking out far. But even a small tree is going to be quite a bit more than 4 cubits wide, right? Even a small tree is going to, have a good width, 10, 20, 30 cubits, even more. So he didn't name a location that was definite enough. He didn't define the location of his Shabbos dwelling as if he was standing in it, and that's why it was ineffective. Rav says, not only is it ineffective that he didn't make his dwelling under that tree, but because he said my Shabbos dwelling is under that tree, so then his Shabbos dwelling can't be the place where he was standing when he made that declaration. So now this is a person who has no Shabbos dwelling. And as we know, a person with no Shabbos dwelling is like a person outside his Shabbos dwelling, and he is stuck in the 4 cubits where he's standing. Now this person, maybe he didn't realize the law, and so he might not know that he's confined to his 4 cubits, and he'll just go on and, this is a person who tried to use the law properly, and he just didn't define it quite right. So if you're going to try to make use of this device, try to learn the law so that you can do it properly. But Shmuel says, well, we could be a little bit more lenient than he only gets 4 cubits. He really intended to make his dwelling there. He just didn't define it carefully enough. But if that whole tree, what he said, the area under that tree, if all the area under that tree is within 2,000 cubits of where he made the statement, then he can go to that tree. He's going to get the 2,000 cubits between where he was standing when he made the declaration and where that tree is. He didn't establish a dwelling under the tree. His dwelling really is where he started, so he can get to the tree. He's not going to be able to walk home. But also he's not going to be able to go 2,000 cubits in the other direction because he intended to go that way. And we saw this before. He's going to be like somebody caught between a donkey driver and a camel driver, right? The camel driver pushes from behind. The donkey driver pulls from in front. And so this person is actually going to get only half of his regular boundary. He's going to get the area between where he made the declaration and the tree where he intended to make it, but he's going to lose, the ability to go 2,000 cubits in the other way from where he was standing when he made it, nor can he go past the tree. So he's going to get a limited techum, a limited boundary, but at least it's only going to be half as big as a normal one. It's not going to be just limited to the tiny one of 4 cubits. That's what I've got for us today. Let me go to your comments and questions. At this point, I would say that our takeaway, going back to the courtyards that join together, food has this wonderful power to bring neighbors together, but not if somebody is going to be, cheap about it and say, well, I don't want to join in, right? So if you're ever going to a neighborhood potluck, be generous. Bring something nice. Don't leave it to the other people to make food for everybody else. Participating in food for some kind of neighborhood, get together. I'm obviously stretching a little bit, but I think that is an underlying principle of what we learned today. It's not bad. It's not bad, because definitely, and there's another place where we learned in this tractate that even when a town made a town-wide eruv, so that the neighborhood little, courtyard eruvs weren't even necessary anymore, because now you can carry throughout the whole town. The sages didn't want those laws of the little neighborhood eruvs, the little neighboring courtyard eruvs, to be forgotten. And so I can't even remember exactly how they did it, but they did establish the law so that there was still a mechanism for joining courtyards, even when they're joined within a larger neighborhood eruv. And that must be because they like the idea of neighbors coming together and establishing joint boundaries that they can carry within on Shabbos, because it gets them to know each other, right? It's good for being neighborly. All right, let me check your comments and questions. And by the way, anyone who went through the whole fast today and is learning Torah with us right now, big shkoyach to you. Yasher koach. May you be strengthened. We're exhausted. We were learning and praying and being in the Yom Kippur space all day long. And now we're learning some Torah on top of that in the evening. That's good. That's good. Okay, Bill Eldridge. So the sense of ownership is, in essence, defining the eruv as a commons. The homes that make up the space remain the realm of each autonomous house, but the shared space is both everyone's responsibility and also everyone's right. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. It's like they're giving each other sort of, low-grade easements to walk through each other's common spaces. The purpose is so that they can carry, right? It's not that you're expected to now go just walking around your neighbor's yard. But the idea is that if somebody needed to carry something from one courtyard to the other, and this is why it's important that these are multiple home courtyards, right? So there's already a sense of shared space in those courtyards. It's not like they're just traipsing through each other's private property. There's already a sense of sharing in these courtyards. They're multi-home courtyards, and now they're just joining the courtyards together. Sharon. If you can simply declare your Shabbos dwelling, why can't you just declare your home as the Shabbos dwelling? In that situation of the person on the road, he's 4,000 cubits from his home. He can't declare his home as the Shabbos dwelling, because if he does, then where he's standing now is outside his Shabbos dwelling, right? He's on the road and Shabbos is falling quickly. So if he doesn't declare a Shabbos dwelling that includes his present location and his home, right? That works, because now he's going to be able to get to from where he is to his home. But if he just says that his home is his Shabbos dwelling, then the spot where he's standing now, which is 4,000 cubits away from his home, is outside. that big square that has his home in its center, and then he would actually be stuck in the 4 cubits where he is. And so Charles Velez says, I enjoy your program. They're very educational. I'm discovering my Jewish roots, and I'm very proud. Do you have any suggestion for me? I would appreciate. I mean, what I would say to anybody who's curious about Judaism, whether it's because you're just curious about Judaism or because you're discovering that you yourself are a Jew or have Jewish roots and you want to learn more. So great resources for learning more about Judaism. Well, one is accidentaltalmudist.org, our website. There's a lot of information there. But if you're talking about a website that's really designed for learning about Judaism, Chabad.org is the best. I mean, they just have so much information about all Jewish practice, including conversion to Judaism. There's questions about that answered there as well. Highly recommend Chabad.org. Aish.com, AISH.com is also a wonderful resource. And that's what I would recommend. Jack Tamir says, I missed the beginning, but does a modern community eruv require some communal food basket I am not aware of? And the answer is yes. I was not aware of it either until I did some research some weeks ago. And yes, community eruvs do have a basket of food deposited somewhere within that large community eruv. Usually it's matzah because it keeps for a long time. And then you might ask, well, did everyone who lives within this massive eruv, like the one in Los Angeles is miles and miles, many square miles. Obviously, not everybody who lives in that participated in the eruv. And so when it's these large numbers of people, they go through a kind of legal mechanism where, it's sort of like the community appoints certain individuals to be their agent to deposit food in the basket on behalf of everyone else. There's obviously a lot more to it than that, but that's the basic idea. All right, my friends, that's what I've got for us today. As we say in Yiddish, as we're coming out of the high holidays, a gut gebenched yor. May you have a blessed year. May you have a year filled with blessings. May you have a good year, a blessed year. Sending you all our love from LA.